All right. So, break's over. And during that break, before I wanted to jump into the Soviet first reaction, I went back and reread some of the rules, and not surprising to myself, but hopefully to anyone, mistakes were made. So, and some of them, I don't think it would have impacted anything drastically, but some of them were pretty dumb. So I think one thing is at some point I think I mentioned that there's some asymmetry in the stacking limit. That is true. I think I said it was German 3, Soviet 2. The reality is it's actually Germans 4, Soviets 3. Probably wouldn't have impacted anything too much. Another thing, this one was sort of a big deal. You can't instant counterattack an incoming attack, which when I read that, I was like, oh, yeah, of course. That completely makes sense. But I know with the Soviets, I was counterattacking down here. In this area, I was counterattacking incoming attacks. You can't do that. Another thing is you have to stop when you enter an enemy zone of control. I thought that might have come into play around here, but 2-8 units for the Soviets that are not guards. You can sort of see a 2-8 unit right here that is a guard. A non-guard 2-8 unit doesn't have a zone of control, but I think at some point I moved from one to the other. So in that case, it didn't matter, but it was a rule that I had totally blanked on. So you hit a zone of control, you have to stop unless you attack or overrun. One interesting one that I totally overlooked, and I don't think it would have had a huge impact because the Soviets got the reaction relatively early in the poll. But there's a space here. The apologies for butchering everything. The Mamayev Kurgan. It's a hilltop. It's a victory hex. As long as the Soviets are in control of that hex, which means basically they have a unit there, or if they were the last one to sort of have a unit there, you draw 2 chits when you do the reaction, not just one. So it sort of gets the Soviets back in the game a little quicker. When the Germans take over or gain control of that, you then go back to drawing one reaction chit. All right, so another one was when I was doing the surprise attack. You can't do that when you're defending. I had it all wrong. You don't defend with all the surrounding hexes and then a surprise makes it only that single hex. That's not it at all. So the surprise attack, I think, has more to do with whether or not you're able to allocate any artillery, sort of any combined arms to the attack. So with the surprise attack, obviously you can't do that. You only get to defend in that hex with the units, whether they're flipped over or not. That's one small point I don't know if I mentioned. Even if a unit's flipped over, it can always participate in its own defense. What else? I don't think it came up. It could have, though, in this area here. You can attack again after a breakthrough. I totally overlooked that. So that's something I'll have to keep in mind going forward, especially for the Germans, so they can sort of make like a run through Soviet forces. And then lastly, I think I did a really poor job of explaining the terrain effects chart. Specifically, I know that I misspoke in particular when describing rows 6 and 7. So row 6 is Soviets are doing defensive fire, and the terrain taken into account is where the German unit is. So Soviet defensive fire, the terrain is what the German unit is in. German defensive fire, the terrain is what the Soviet unit is in. So you can see the Soviets defend extremely well from structures. I think that's what those are trying to get in. Where the Germans are, you get a little bonus from a hilltop, you get a little bonus from a park, you get the double firepower if the Soviets out in the open. I mean, that makes sense. But yeah, the real point of this is, so if the Soviets are defending from a fortified structure, they're going to really bring the pain to any units opposing them in that fight. So that's sort of the main things. Again, I don't think they made a huge difference for what happened in turn 1. Well, not even turn 1, the first phase of turn 1. But hopefully, again, this is the first time I've ever played this game. And as I mentioned, it's been over a month since I first read the rules, and the turns come few and far between. Hopefully going forward, it won't be such a big deal as I sort of internalize more of the rule book. that's going to be an interesting thing. Some of these games that I have on the shelf, well, one limitation is, this sort of setup. I don't know how big of a map I could truly put on the table here, not just table space wise, but, with this camera. It seems like a standard 22 by 34 map fits pretty nicely with how I want to do this. But sometimes I think, games like Unconditional Surrender, which I really like and have sitting on the shelf, might be fun to do. But I'm not sure with my current space how to do it. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that, the way I end up reading the rule books, it's going to be interesting. Like, do I try more complicated games, even if they're single mappers, because I'm going to miss tons of rules given how infrequently I take turns? Or do I try and keep it on the simple side? Like, this game's rulebook clocks in at the Excalibur edition is formatted differently, but like 30 something pages, I guess. Well, actually, let me take a look. Clocks in at 30 something pages, but as you can probably see, it's not the old school triple column formatting. It's, nice big spread out pages. So I think the old SPI version of it is 16, 17 pages. But it sort of brings up, in my head, what kind of games will I be doing in the future? Like, do I just keep them super simple so I make less rules mistakes, or do I try something a little bigger and sloppier? If not map size, at least rules and concept wise. All right. So pretty soon I'll be getting to the Soviets' first reaction phase, which is going to have a few extra steps from the German one. It's going to involve, in this case, some reinforcements. Bringing in some Trans-Volga artillery. I think these spaces here you can see marked. So I'm just going to double check exactly how they work. There's a couple of rules on how many units they get to move based on some die rolls and who's on the board. So I'm just going to double check that. And hopefully we'll get started pretty soon.